Well, I want to welcome everybody on at 7 o'clock, and with Solid, we try to start on time and stay on time. Uh, this evening, Solid, as most of you are aware of, is we meet each month, the third Thursday of each month. And this evening, we're very pleased to have Dr. Joshua Lyer, who's a internal medicine physician practicing in Idaho. But he's put together a really excellent discussion about passing the boards, which is an area of big interest. So, Doctor, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Good. So feel free to kind of save some questions to the end. Gina, just try to focus on some high yield stuff about passing the boards. So if anybody wants to do the hand raise on Zoom, which board exam are you preparing for? USMLE, COMLEX, both? Or you can put it in the chat if you want. And I'm seeing both, COMLEX, both. I'm going to recommend everybody does both, and the reason why, we'll get to that in a little bit later. COMLEX and USMLE, does anyone think there's any correlation to their scores? Meaning if you do well on one, are you going to do well on the other? Or if you do poor on one, do you think you're going to do poor on the other? Anybody says true, anybody says false? We got some trues, some false. Looks like false is maybe winning. Okay, we'll see. So this is a study, resources that improve medical board licensing exam performance, and the highlighted portion is the high yield one. They looked at, I think 100 medical students, and in this specific school, I believe it was University of New England College of Osteopathic Medicine. They found that their students who prepared for the USMLE actually did better overall on both exams, and they did better on COMLEX compared to the students who only prepared specifically for COMLEX. And there's a couple reasons why. My personal opinion is that if you're preparing for both exams, odds are you're typically doing probably more practice questions, and you're spending more time possibly prepping and just getting exposed. And more importantly, you're doing probably more testing, and that's kind of the high yield, and we'll kind of go through that in these later slides. So, most of you guys are year one or beyond. And so step one, definitely your coursework, your preclinical grades are extremely important. If you're doing well on your coursework, that's going to translate to all your exams and overall your performance as a physician, as a future resident. I would recommend people really think about using a study group. The benefit of a study group is it kind of holds us accountable. Also can help us somewhat streamline and again test each other. I would recommend at this stage, even if you're only in November of your first year, I would recommend finding a review book or like maybe 2 review books and incorporating them into your studies. If you have the intention of saving these review books to the end, it's actually studies show that that's not very beneficial. It's more impactful to incorporate this from the very beginning so you can utilize these resources while you're doing your regular coursework. And then I would recommend at this stage possibly getting, if you're a year one students, to go ahead and get a question bank. At this stage, I would say if you're a year one, it's not extremely important which question bank. I would just recommend getting one and get into the habit of testing yourself. And then another thing I'd recommend, even if you're doing fairly well in your courses, I would still recommend utilizing the resources of tutors. Tutors can really help streamline your focus and kind of provide that extra experience to help you get through these courses a little bit better and just time management and better prepare. Use the resources of those upperclassmen. Year two, kind of the same thing. Coursework is extremely important as well. Still be using a review book. Definitely make the question bank a year or two from the very beginning. Make it a part of your normal routine for studying. If we had to put a number of questions, a couple studies out there put a rough estimate of 5,000 plus questions. Now that doesn't have to be strictly from question banks. That also includes all the normal questions you're doing with your exams. But 5,000 plus questions has correlated well to having high pass rates first time attempts. Again, I would recommend using a study group. Study groups, again, hold us accountable, can make the burden of studying less lonely. And again, hopefully as a year two, if you're using the same study group, you're reaching a point to where you feel comfortable teaching others, be open with questions, let other people teach you. That's kind of the whole, main principles of being a physician. And then again, if you have the time, I'd recommend tutoring others. The best way to really affirm what we know is teaching other people. So I'd again recommend this as another piece of the process. Question bank, intend to use, go ahead and throw that in the chat. This is not all inclusive, and there's any ones that are going to be successful, but UWorld, CommBank, CommQuest, Kaplan, MBOSS, Board Vitals. We got UWorld, TrueLearn, MBOSS World, CommBank, TrueLearn, UWorld, CommBank, MBOSS. So it looks like most of these resources everybody's kind of familiar with. And then does anyone currently participate in a study group, or is anyone currently using a tutor or is a tutor for other people? We got tutor, yes, tutor, no. Ooh, tutor for every subject at school. First year tutor, okay, so that's good. Year three, kind of same process, review books, question banks. Here, you're going to be on rotations. There are rotation specific review books. I'd recommend those. Again, it's hard enough to learn family medicine as a resident. One of these books can really streamline and at least make some of the clinical scenarios very practical. And again, things you can apply to forfeiture exams. Okay, so these are, the most important slides are kind of now. So keys for passing boards. I think it's these three important pieces. So testing, you have to test yourself. If you're not testing yourself already, it's kind of hard to know the gaps in your knowledge. With good testing, more importantly, you got to review all your mistakes. I would recommend you maintain a list of these sessions. What I would personally do is use Google Sheets, make a couple columns. One column would be the topic, question stem, put down a reason why I missed it wrong, and then kind of go in the details of how I can kind of bridge that gap. So when I'm reviewing these questions, I need to identify these mistakes I'm making so I don't keep making them when it comes time to take my actual board exams. I would say if you're spending an hour to do questions, like say 50 questions, it's depending on your score, it could probably take you 2 hours to review that same set of questions and review them well. And then after that review, that's when you kind of cycle back in the study. And again, after you're studying, you got to go back to testing, back to review, and it's just a constant cycle on a pretty much weekly basis, if not a fairly daily basis, depending on where you are in that cycle. So this is again, another article. Spaced repetitions over the long time scales is shown to be the most effective way to consolidate all this information. So one of the concepts is you're going to study a topic today, do as much as you can, and then maybe a day or 2 days later, you're going to review the same material, again, in that cycle of testing, review, study. Then again, that same material needs to be kind of followed up on maybe a week or two later, and then maybe at the end of the month as you're approaching a big exam. If you're not doing spaced repetition, then the challenge is you're going to be remembering this stuff for short term, and it's not going to be crossing over to that long-term recall. So when you're finally in these stressful situations, taking the exams, you're not going to be able to have that information brought forward, and you're likely going to make various errors when you're reading these test questions, and you're going to make mistakes. So again, spaced repetition, very important. this is, let's see, the article here, and it goes into full details and different approaches on how to incorporate spaced repetition. But the main takeaway is that when you're covering one topic, review it in such a way that you're going to be planning that probably at least 3 to 4 more times within the month, so you can try to cross this information over into your long-term memory. So now this article again was talking about successful study habits. Where does commercial resources, so these are your Kaplan programs that are specific for step 1 or step 2, first aid books. Ultimately, these specific courses have found to be minimally effective at improving your scores. What actually has been effective is, again, a peer designed. So there are some schools that if you're struggling, they can help really prepare a proper plan for you. And those plans have shown to be more effective at raising your scores and increasing pass rates. And then most importantly, the thing here and highlighted is talking about using these resources. If you're going to use a first aid, a step up to medicine, any of these review books, to incorporate them from your study from the very beginning. That way you can put notes in them. You've already read it a few times. You've applied it to your already coursework in your classes. Do not use these books as the last piece. Keep them a part of your study program from the very beginning and in your regular classes. So that's kind of the title of that article, Predictors of USMLE Step 1 Outcomes, Charting Successful Student. And this is kind of the concept of, again, spaced repetition. So immediately after the class, we're covering it. 24 hours later, a week later, a month later. The more times you do the spaced repetition, the more likely you're going to keep recalling that information. And you'll reach a point to where you don't have to keep constantly spending the same amount of time reviewing the material. And again, testing is a part of this study aspect, making sure we know what we know and reviewing the stuff we don't. So again, in that same article, predictors of passing, ultimately, the highest correlation was actually your preclinical grade. Practice test scores plus your preclinical grades, and then the number of your practice tests or practice questions. The amount of time you spent doing practice questions and the hours a day spent studying actually had very low correlation to your step 1 scores, which that kind of just basically says if you're not studying effectively, the constant test, review, study cycle, you're going to be spending a lot of time, but not crossing over and keeping that high yield information when you come again to take your actual test. So again, preclinical grades, keep these study aids from the day 1, constant testing, reviewing, and studying is how you're going to cross all this new information into your long-term memory. So again, one mistake that I've seen students make is that they spend a lot of time reviewing information, which is not the same thing as testing. Testing improves the recall. Reviewing the information gives you a false sense of knowledge. People who are cramming maybe the night before, a week before, and just constantly reviewing the same stuff, maybe writing it out, saying it to themselves, or however you incorporate that, ultimately that gives you, again, a false sense of you actually knowing the material. The most important piece is the spaced repetition with the testing, because the testing forces you to recall that in a stressful situation, which is what it's going to be basically when you're taking these exams. So again, this is another article supporting the preclinical grades, that they do matter. You need to do well, be engaged in your classes. And so this is from University of Minnesota. They, next slide will show you their website, but these are kind of the common errors they encountered. They broke most mistakes down into 6. So misread direction errors. So basically you're reading a question, and most of these exams always are pick quote unquote the best answer, or you're putting something in a ranked choice order. And ultimately, if you just don't understand the question, the directions, and you apply wrong, then you're going to obviously miss the question. Careless errors are kind of basically not reading the whole question from start to finish, not paying attention completely. Concept errors are again applying the information incorrectly. Application errors, kind of the same process. Test procedure errors are you're applying, you're putting A when you actually think the answer is B. This can happen a lot in these days of online testing. Sometimes people's mouse will flip somebody's answer from a B to C as they're scrolling down. So just always pay attention to that. And then study errors. This is probably the best opportunity for a tutor. So study errors are pretty much you studied the wrong material. You spent too much time on maybe one aspect of cardiology, physiology that wasn't really applicable to your exam. Again, this is where the tutors can really help focus your attention, and then also doing repetitive questions can really help bring to life what you need to study. So this again, University of Minnesota, it's on their Student Success Center. It goes through the 6 types of test taking errors. And then this is another article. It talks about ultimately the people who did the best on retrieval, getting appropriately twice as many questions correct compared to those who did not do any retrieval practice. So again, retrieval practice could be any form of testing. It can be doing multiple questions. It can be fill in the blank. It can be cued recall, where maybe it's hints are written down. Ultimately, the best thing is anything that forces you to engage in that recall process. Again, self-testing is going to be very effective at retaining the information and applying it in the stressful situation of taking these exams. And I believe this is Vanderbilt's University. Again, they go through more details on how to use retrieval practice to nail down these test exams. So the additional basic keys for passing the boards, I think it's extremely important to be organized. I'm a big fan of the iPad just because it's so easy to read these PDFs and do various notes. Just so as an example, on my right side, I used the notes folder when I was a student and as a resident. So I would kind of break things up into topics like endocrinology, gastro, geriatrics, palliative care. And anytime I came across something I didn't know, or a pearl, if I was on a rotation, I would put that into my notes. And then that was something that was very searchable and easy for me to access across all my different devices. And it just made it relevant that I could bring it to the bedside. And just made it a lot more easy to retain that information, again, test myself. PDF Expert is a program that just helps you read PDFs pretty well. MarginNote is the thing in the center. It's a very nice note program that can let you do mind maps. You can copy from a folder and bring it over into these little boxes. It's just another way to present information, depending on how you like to study or how you like to consolidate your info. And again, Google Sheets, I think that's probably the best way to really review your questions. So you can have a couple columns of the topics, the question stem, really analyze why you got it wrong, and then list all the reasons, why the other questions were not correct. My personal opinion, when you do the week of the test, very important to be getting good week of sleep. Definitely confirm the location, confirm all the identification you need. I have had actually some fellow residents who showed up to their exam without their ID, and that was extremely stressful because people just forget. Definitely you can continue questions and review during the week of the test. I would not do any studying the day before the test. You're not really going to make any gains there. I would just be relaxed, be well rested, and be prepared. You've already done months or technically 2 years if you're going for step 1 as a first year, or an additional year if you're already going for step 2 if you're a third year. So again, you've already done all the hard work. This week of the exam is not going to make or break your performance. This is just some additional links. So again, most of you guys already know about Amboss, World, Pathoma, Online MedEd. This Divine Intervention podcast, it's actually interesting podcast that just covers various topics relevant to medical students. Tulane does have their own USMLE Step 1 prep guide, which is also helpful. And then I'll share the link on this, what are we even measuring? There is actually a couple, a physician, a statistician who kind of went through the details pre-pass fail on these exams, really what the difference is. And a high score versus an average score can really be the difference on some of these exams by as little as 25 questions. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're studying. And, if you're not doing as well as you think you should be doing on these practice exams or on these test questions at any specific moment, just keep in mind you're building up for that final exam. That's when you have to do well. And regardless of what your score is, don't let that score, make or break your mood or how you view what you did, because again, it could literally be 25, maybe 30 questions that separates the highest score from an average score, or even maybe a little bit below average score. These are just some resources I found from a company called CramFighter. Again, at that time, first aid was very popular. 60% of students, UWorld, Boards and Beyond. When I was a medical student, basically first aid and UWorld were kind of and Boards and Beyond, those were the top three. Same thing when I went through. Step 2, again, UWorld, Online MedEd, Anarchy, and Boss. So big thing, again, do well in your courses. All this pre-work does actually matter. Again, it's the biggest correlation to your actual performance. I would recommend getting a review book from the very beginning. Keep that in with all your coursework. Add notes to it, utilize it well. Definitely get a question bank, start doing those questions. If we had to put a number again, I'd say 5,000, but that includes all your questions. I would say it's more important to do questions and review them well than it is to just buzz through, and get a high number of questions. If you're not reviewing your mistakes, you're just going to keep making the same ones. And then very important, retest on the concepts you are getting incorrect. You don't need to spend a lot of time covering stuff you already know. The whole point of testing is identifying the mistakes and the gaps and filling those in with repetition. Again, with a study group, review books, being a tutor, those are kind of the big keys. And then we'll kind of open up the questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can just turn off your mic and we can do our best to answer you. Got quite a few people on here who different levels of academic involvement, so feel free to ask all your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. I think what we'll do, perhaps we'll have Kim do her presentation, and then we'll have time for both of you to, we got some questions coming in. So there's a question, I think it's a good question. If I plan to take both USMLE and COMLEX, which one is the best to take first, or does it matter?
My personal opinion, I'd say from my experience, most everybody takes USMLE first, and then they would take COMLEX as the second one. And some of that's partially because I think people want to save any dedicated OMM specific study type stuff till after the USMLE exam. One, because it's not going to be relevant on the USMLE exam. So that would be my strategy.
There's a question, how much time do you recommend devoting to studying? Do we have any statistics on that?
In the articles I cited, I would just say, ultimately, I wouldn't put any hard numbers on it. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. From my personal experience going through medical school, the students who seemed to do the best were the ones who had the most extra stuff going on outside of medical school. So, and I think those people ultimately force themselves to be more effective with whatever time they put towards studying. If you kind of approach studying with the concept of, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I don't have to do anything for the next 5-6 hours but study, I think in that scenario, you'll probably be less effective. If you try to put a constraint on your time and say, I'm gonna study for the next 3 hours, you might find yourself being more effective and getting more out of it. That's how I would do it. because you want to build these habits for when you're a resident. You don't want these things to be all time consuming your life because you're going to get burned down. It's not going to be enjoyable. So I would still set rules and set restrictions and then see how well you operate within those.
There's a question, since both are pass fail, is it now required to take step one as a DO student, or can I just skip step one and just do step two, of course, alongside level 1 and 2?
I haven't looked up the most recent rules, but the reason why I would just do all the exams is because I think it might be less clear on how these exams are all going to funnel towards a future board exam. So let's say if you become internal medicine and you want to go all the way to cardiology, the fellowship application is probably going to want all the exams. And then if you want to do the board certification through the allopathic side, I'm pretty confident they're going to want your USMLE exams, just the fact that you've passed them, because that's how they're going to usually apply them for their own boards. But that may change. All of this is
One more question, I think is a good question. What resources should I use for OMM test?
I think it's the Savarese book, right? The green one. I think that's a classic. And then I think Ohio College, one of those College of Osteopathic Medicine had a really nice slide deck of, I think it was like 130 slides, and really had a lot of high yield OMM specific stuff. But I think it's Savarese, if I remember that right, the green book.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, Josh, and hang on. So when Kim completes her presentation, we'll have some more time to ask questions for both. So I want to introduce Kim Peck. Kim is the Director of Academic and Career Advising at Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. She's also very experienced when it comes to taking these boards. So Kim, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I am the Director of Advising and Academic and Career Advising. So I work with our students both in preparing for boards and then what happens in residency with these different boards. So as I was listening to the questions, I did have some opinions about USMLE and so forth. So I'm just going to pull up my slides here. Can everyone see my screen? Oops, still looking presenter mode. There we go.
Yes.
Everything looks good? Okay. Basically, I am just going through a simple presentation of COMLEX versus USMLE, but like I said, I'd be happy to answer any questions about pass fail, taking it, and all of that kind of thing. Is stuff we're asked every day. So today I'm going to go over the comparison of the exams, the blueprint versus the USMLE, content breakdown. Should I take USMLE, which is always a big question, especially now that it's pass fail, and what the value is, and the change to the pass fail system and the impacts. We've had one cycle with pass fail. So, but those students haven't gone through the residency application cycle yet. So there is still a lot that is unknown about this. So just some logistical comparison of the exams. They both are licensing exams, but there are some differences. The COMLEX is required for DOs. MDs cannot take it, where USMLE is open to both DOs and MDs. They both have 3 steps or levels. And if you look here at the structure, they're a little bit different structure. COMLEX is more questions than the USMLE, a little bit different breakdown of breaks and things like that. So my recommendation to every student is to really understand both of the tests before you take them, what you're going to be getting into when you practice your full-length exams to mimic, simulate those same test breaks and so forth. The questions types and styles, this is kind of more anecdotal. And I have here that COMLEX tends to ask more vague questions and ask students to pick the most correct answer, where USMLE, very, very rarely are my students surprised about the questions. It's what they saw in UWorld, it's what they get on the exam. They're very rigorous, but they're very clear and straightforward. So depending on what type of test take you are, it could really be, you know, different appealing to you. A lot of students like USMLE better. It is difficult, there's no doubt about that. But there's a lot of people uncomfortable with some of the ambiguity that surrounds the complex questions. And again, that's just my experience talking to students over the years, and that has been pretty consistent in my last 10 years of working with students. What is the pass rate? 400 was the score prior to pass-fail. And is now with USMLE, the passing threshold has increased to 196. But again, pass-fail scoring for level 1 and step 1. We have, prior to this, we have the means, which will no longer make a difference. I did look up the DO first time pass rate, and for the current cycle, or the most reported cycle, is 92.2, which was down from 93.7% in 2021. Oops. And then USMLE was 96%. So one of the things I tell my students a lot is to make sure they know what they're getting into when they are studying for these exams. So we really encourage students to look at the blueprint, know where the heavier subjects are, and to be strategic about what they're studying. So every single student, whether you're going in looking at COMLEX or you're looking at USMLE, is to know the percentages breakdown. And if you start running out of time or were to devote your time, you're being strategic in looking at those higher yield areas. One of the things I think that's interesting is a lot of times, we kind of mentioned that before, when do you take USMLE versus COMLEX? And almost always, if you talk to students, they'll say take USMLE first and then COMLEX and do OMM the week in between. My only problem with that is that OMM and those principles really do require more than a week. If you look at the MLME Master Blueprint, it states, osteopathic principles and practices by design are integrated throughout all areas of the examination, as this best reflects the manner in which osteopathic principles and practices permeate osteopathic medicine. And what I find is I have no problem with people taking USMLE first and COMLEX second. But I do think that some students underestimate the OMM and the osteopathic principles integrated into all of the questions. It's not just straight OMM, there's a lot of integration. And I think it doesn't do it a service to put it in 1 week. And I feel like that can be a topic that many people can grasp. And if you're strategic, you can get a lot of points from. But a lot of times when people aren't using a ComBank or something with, or a ComQuest, something with those osteopathic questions, that they can kind of miss some points that would be relatively low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. So again, that's just really why I recommend studying the blueprints, understanding what's on it. And again, you'll see that reflected in your UWorld, which I think is an excellent QBank, but you also do need a QBank that has the osteopathic principles, so you get ready for the question style of the COMLEX, which is very different from the USMLE question style. So if you've started using the QBanks at all, I'm sure you can attest to it takes some practice to get the flow of both styles of questions. And again, just like the NBOME COMLEX blueprint, it is very helpful to know the differences and what content is going to be covered in the USMLE. So the question that I saw when we had questions is, should I take the USMLE? And my question, and maybe I'll pose it out to you, is, you know, what are some of the reasons that you would like to take the USMLE? If you could put some, you know, ideas in the chat or what your thoughts are on taking that. Interesting to see what you have to say. Opens more doors, absolutely. Yep, going into surgery, it's definitely specialty. Afraid that programs will not accept COMLEX. All great answers. Interest in more competitive subspecialties. To not get screened out for not taking USMLE. Good. So some of them that I hear a lot are, just like we said, required by a specialty. Surgical specialties are particularly known for that. Although for an osteopathic, again, I absolutely agree with that. But for a lot of osteopathic students, at least when I'm now in Michigan, and a lot of really ultra competitive specialties, my students will tend to apply heavily to historically osteopathically accredited programs, because they do tend to have a better chance in those surgical specialties, which I'm sure your career advising will let you know that. Another common reason, someone told you to, usually an upperclassman. You may not know why, but that's what you hear, and that's totally fine. You're undecided on specialties, and you want to keep those options open. Absolutely. And with, if you don't know what you want to do, you may not know where you want to go geographically. I think that's a wise idea. Want to match in a geographic area where USMLE is prevalent. Want to pursue a fellowship, and it may be required to keep your options open and maximize chances of matching into competitive specialty. Those are all definitely true. Why wouldn't you take USMLE? And really, there's only one reason, in my opinion, that I would really recommend a student not take it, is if you're truly studying, if you're really struggling with the exam, maybe you found pre-clerkship particularly challenging, you're not a good test taker, and perhaps spreading yourself over 2 different exams is going to be too much, and you may risk failing one or both of them. I would really consider just taking one and trying to do really well on one. Unfortunately, I look at my statistics, and a lot of my students who fail COMLEX, there's a strong correlation of they also will fail USMLE. However, there's a lot of really good resources to help you gauge your progress and the practice tests, and watching your QBank progress, all of those different key indicators that you could talk to your faculty advisor, make sure you're on track, how you're looking for scoring, all those practice tests. So the only reason I would not want someone to take it is that it's not going to benefit them at all. I've had students go into it anyway, take it and fail it. So please get advice if you feel like you're on the edge, or if you don't know you're going to be, how close you are to passing. Have someone look at all of your data points to really get a holistic view of how you're performing. Considerations, you must prepare for 2 structurally distinct exams. I think anyone who's looked at a ComBank, ComClass versus a UWorld will see drastically different question styles. I often say that COMLEX is rather wide, and USMLE is kind of deep. So like I said, there seems to be some ambiguity in some COMLEX questions that students struggle with in translating what actually is being asked and what is the best answer, where they find that USMLE is quite rigorous, but if you know and you've studied, you either know it or you don't. So you pick the one that you like better, but that seems to be the consensus on it. You must achieve a passing score in 2 board scores versus 1. Will you benefit from it? And all scores are reported on your residency application. So will you benefit for it? If there's some, for example, in Michigan, if you're going into primary care, you want to stay in the state of Michigan, you don't need to take the USMLE. However, that's being that your path is concrete, you know this is what you're going to do, and you're not going to veer from it. The other one is all scores are reported on your residency application. A lot of students don't realize that. And in the ARIS guide, it strictly states that you must report all scores that you have taken. So if something doesn't go well, like say on the USMLE, you can't not request that. NRMP will consider that not disclosing pertinent information in the match. And if a program would find out that you didn't disclose possibly a USMLE failure in your ARIS application, that could be grounds for not continuing your match. It could be a match violation. So just honesty if you take both of them and reporting them. If you're unsure, data to seek out from medical school advisors and faculty are just regional differences in acceptance of COMLEX only specialties and programs. It really does vary widely. I happen to live in Michigan, where COMLEX is widely accepted, but there's certainly some states and some areas of the country where they're not, and it really would benefit you to take the USMLE. Also, I would ask your career advising faculty for match data for students who did not, who took USMLE versus those who did not. I know my college, we keep all of those stats. So if a student is struggling to get to that passing point, we can kind of show them, what the stats look like, who accepts what at this moment. We never know what's going to change, but we try to give them as much information to help them make their decisions as possible. And we also look at USMLE data from students who had similar pre-clerkship performance to help them have some idea of, before they get into and commit to taking USMLE, how they could fare on that exam. Because I do agree that the pre-clerkship coursework is highly correlated, and it's just something to keep in mind. And again, data information to utilize in your decision-making, grades in individual courses, the COMATs, the Foundational Basic Science Exam COMAT is a really good one to start with to get a baseline. Using your COMSAs, especially if your program purchases the institutional COMSAs, those are the most recent COMSAs, so most reflective of the actual COMLEX exam now. The QBank performance and the percentages that you're getting correct. Prior performance on standardized exams. If you have a history of not doing well on standardized exams, something else we should think about. And any test anxiety and other emotional issues you have around taking exams really should all be taken into consideration when you are making your decisions. So changes to the pass-fail. I think we all know that last year, everything went pass-fail to hopefully achieve a more holistic review and to take some pressure off of medical school students. I just wanted to share what those COMLEX, what the score reports look like. So right here, we have the COMLEX exam. This is a pass exam. It's the same score sheet for a fail, but they basically will give you some bars of where your performance was low, average, or high. Unfortunately, what we found this year when a student failed, that most likely there's a lot of low performance here. So there's really no precise way to advise the student who does not pass. So we're actually working with the NBOME, myself, as well as many other osteopathic schools, to try to get a more precise feedback for students so they can see more precisely how they performed in these different areas. So if a retake is going to occur, that they can be more informed about their progress and what they can do better the next time. And again, here is the USMLE score report. And as you see here, USMLE, they have a pass, which you pass, you're good. But for a fail, they actually give you quite a bit more information, and it's much easier to advise a student who doesn't pass USMLE with this information. So we found this very helpful. We actually shared this with NBOME as a possible, something to look at as a consideration to share with students and advisors, so we can better help those who do not pass the exam. So opportunities. What opportunities do you think going to pass-fail has created for you as students? I'm not sure. That's a good answer. So there is a lot of stress taken off of students after the first 2 years of your pre-clerkship going into it. I think we only had 1 year so far. So I don't know if the stress was off last year because students were facing the unknown. They didn't know what this pass-fail felt like. We had a lot of schools reporting that the students kind of took it lightly, and allopathic and osteopathic, and we got some lower or higher fail rates than we did before. However, you're the class will come in, and often lessons are learned from the first round. We saw that a little bit at our school, that students weren't quite taking it seriously, thought, oh, all I have to do is pass. It's not that big a deal. So do take it seriously. Passing is not just something that's going to happen in a week. You do have to prepare, just like Dr. Layer said, you still have to work hard to get to that pass level and to make sure you're confidently over that pass level. Let me see. So possible impacts. So a lot of you are asking, do I need to take step one? Is it even necessary? And I don't think anyone can really tell you that definitively. And if they are, I think it's a good guess. Like I said, the class of 2024 is the first class to go through pass-fail. They have not gone through the residency application process yet. And we have no idea how the program director behavior is going to change. If they're going to still want to see a USMLE, even if it's just pass-fail, or if they will think a COMLEX pass-fail is just as good. I have been on the conservative side of advising my students, and if you feel like it's going to benefit you and we're still not sure, I still have the same advice to take it unless you think it's going to do you harm. So until we know differently, I think students would most students would benefit by taking it. But if you are unsure at all, please get advice and have, someone really look at your situation holistically and figure out what is the best situation for you. Because it really is, it's a lot of individual factors come into play. And I don't think we can just answer yes or no for a group of people. So that's all I have, but happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Thank you much, Kim. There was a couple notes in the chat you might want to address, and Josh, you might want to weigh in as well.
Okay.
The question here about is it so important to take both? Are the residencies required? Residencies are not required to really follow any uniform policy. Again, these board exams all started off as licensing intention, and they became a convenient factor for these residency programs to have an objective measure to compare people. That's really what they are used as for a PD. My program, very small, only took 10 students a year for residency, and we would get 3,000 applications. We had one person helping review that. There's not an easy way to pare down 3,000 people. So that's where all these exams have come into play. And then basically that was causing a lot of excessive stress. Both the allopathic and osteopathic schools changed their policies or got the testing to be a pass-fail situation. If you talk to a lot of residency directors at the time, they were, to be honest, very upset that it was changed because, again, it puts them into another position of how do we compare these people to have somewhat of an objective measure. And so anyways, that puts more emphasis from my experience on these step 2 exams. But again, none of them are required to honor your exam equally. They can 100% go in there and say, weed out everyone who doesn't have a USMLE, and they're allowed to do that.
Yeah, I agree. There is no governing, and that's one of the difficult things about the residency application process. Programs decide, and they can decide if they will take USMLE only. They'll take, if they take both. And if they take both, is one favored, and students don't know that. And there is a problem with program transparency, and programs, have stated that they don't necessarily want to put it out there exactly what their minimum criteria is. So it's really problematic for students and programs. We have over application because students are concerned, and programs overloaded because they're getting so many applications because people are just throwing applications out there hoping something sticks versus intentionally applying. So the GME world is really in a conundrum right now. But there is a lot of talk going on with AAMC, with ARIS, NRMP, and a lot of efforts are being made to change the system. However, I know you're all facing boards, and again, I think we just have to, you have to make the best decision for yourself of what you know right now. And unfortunately, we still, even after one cycle, I don't think we're going to know enough. I think it's going to take a few cycles for us to get a handle on how step one and level one going to pass fail is really going to impact us.
Does this place more pressure on step two?
I absolutely think so. Dr. Lair, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, step two is going to become the objective thing. And it is what it is. And to be honest, I would actually say that's a good thing. Step one, in my personal opinion, doesn't really correlate that well on how well you're going to be as a third or fourth year, or even as a resident. Step two for both does a much better correlation. Everybody, from my experience, on average, does score better on step two. It's more clinically relevant. You just do better on it. And I would be less stressful about step two altogether. And my humble opinion, I think it should always be a graded test. It's probably your best chance to really objectively differentiate yourself from all those other applications. Once you get through the door, then all that other stuff of your application is going to matter. But these scores will continue to be a measuring tool, and I don't think that's ever going to really go away, to be honest.
So there's a question about, can the residency programs only see we pass step one? But if you take step two, by the time you apply, it's probably to your benefit to report those scores. Am I correct on that?
The question I see here is, if we're looking at the same one, I
did a little editing there, so.
Okay, so if you do have a numerical score, if you took it before pass fail, the programs will see your numerical score, unfortunately, for both COMLEX and USMLE.
Okay. So step two, because it does have a recorded score, becomes another factor, correct?
Correct.
Does the pass fail of step one have any influence on the fellowship once you complete your residency or finishing your residency? Do these scores matter when it comes to the selection of a fellow?
From my experience, these all definitely are going to matter.
I've heard mixed. A lot of our students go into fellowship, and well, it's looked at, they say the level 3, step 3, and then actually performance, leadership, and residency is also a big factor. So I wouldn't want people to think that this is forever hanging around your neck. There's a lot of things that you can do to show progress, and that was something in the past. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I will caveat my answer. So matter in the fact that they will be reported, they will be asked about.
Yeah.
In terms of, again, the impact, 100%, they're going to be less impactful at a fellowship compared to they were as a resident.
If you fail step one and retake it, either test, how is that reported to the residency director?
It's in your ARIS application. When you fill out your ARIS, you have to request your NBME and MBME scores, and every single attempt will be on both of those transcripts. And for the students who took level 1, step 1 prior to pass fail, a numerical score will be shown on that transcript.
Is there a difference between schools? And what I asked that as far as passing either test or the ability to match. In other words, if a college has grades or doesn't have, if the college has pass fail or has grades, how is that influenced into the residency selection process?
That's a good question. And also, there's a lot of schools, it's a big trend to go pass fail these days on the college transcript. That seems to be a big movement. MSU Com is actually a pass fail school, but we report grades on our MSPE. And that was when we revamped the MSPE according to the AAMC guidelines. The program directors were quite clear. They're like, they want to know comparative numbers of how our students are doing. And we put it out there, and we do have students who fail courses, but they also can see the remediated grades. And we have students who have failed pre-clerkship courses and still go on to match. So we really coach the students on how to talk about any of those challenges they have, show evidence of how they improve themselves. But there is some talk about that. And then when you have pass fail and pre-clerkship and the pass fail on step 1 and level 1, what quantitative measures of the program is going to look at until you have step 2, level 2. And unfortunately for students, level 2 and step 2, you don't generally take it until the summer right before you submit your applications. So if you think you're going into orthopedic surgery and you get a 500, you're not going to probably make orthopedic surgery, and you maybe have scheduled all your audition rotations, planned everything, and then that score crashes everything at the last minute. So that's the big challenge. And I see a lot of more holistic reviewing, but not in some of those specialties like surgical specialties, derm, ENT. The ultra competitive are still ultra competitive. And I can't imagine a big shift in that mentality anytime soon. It's really about getting you in the door. That's what's going to get you the interview, are those scores that they have to filter through, unfortunately.
Do most schools report, even if they're pass fail, report a class standing?
It's mixed. I've actually, when we were putting our MSPE, revamping it, we've looked, and a wide variety. Many don't, and many do. So it really is dependent. And there's a big move right now to go not to have any grades and pass fail only. So I don't know if that also is changing and removing that quartile or class ranking from the MSPE. So I think things are evolving, but I do question if it's going to evolve back with all of these lack of quantitative measures and what the programs are going to use. That's why we've decided to keep it, even though everyone's going. We're also trying to find ways for high achieving students to be able to distinguish themselves, because they used to be able to do that earlier on with a board score, and now there's fewer opportunities. So we're trying to create things like that for students to help themselves stand out and be competitive.
Well, right up against our time here. Josh, you want to make any closing remarks? And then I'll ask him to make a remark as well as we end this.
Again, the takeaways, my big things: test, review, and study. I mean, those 3 things, that's going to carry you really far for these exams. Just make it this: you're studying, you're working towards your profession. A profession is not a job. It's something you're going to put a lot of time into. All the work you do now is going to be paying dividends, and just do the work and enjoy the work.
Kim?
I kind of echo that, like, start studying and have a solid plan, and start chipping it away at it early, like right when you start, get into good habits, create good habits. And by the time you're in your dedicated study, you've really developed sound habits, healthy, a lifestyle, and that you don't drop when you are studying for boards, and that you're busy in residency. Try to build those lifelong habits now, because it'll only help you have, be well in your career, in your residency, and so forth. So really try to build a solid foundation now, and continue to work on it all the way through med school and into residency and so forth.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a very informative session of Solid. Speaking of Solid, and I want to thank you all both for your time and your presentation.